Dear listeners, wherever you are, curl up with a cup of something warm. Tonight, you're stepping into history's hidden corners with me. Let the day slip away as we unfold a tale stitched from starlight, memory and a little quiet wonder. I found a cloth, old and frayed, and when I touched it, the world shifted. One breath I was among quiet shelves, the next I was standing in New Orleans, where jazz lived in every streetlight and shadow. Music wasn't only sound, it was power. And at the center stood a man with a trumpet, whose spellbound songs could change everything. What does a song take when it steals a memory? That night begins with the cloth itself. Waiting in silence, the silver cloth rested inside a display case, its frayed edges catching in the dim sweep of security lights. I almost walked past it. One more overlooked scrap in rows of forgotten instruments and cases. Then, when I straightened the label, something stirred beneath my glove. A tremor. A note tucked inside silence. It wasn't the drone of loose wiring or the murmur of pipes. It was warmer, as though a voice pressed itself through a wall. I leaned in, and the faint hum thickened into rhythm. The pencil slipped from my hand, rolling noiseless across the desk. Beyond the glass, the museum's after-hours sounds fell away, leaving me alone with the cloth's insistent vibration. When I lifted it, the sound came clearer. A phrase of jazz, unfinished, circling back on itself as if searching for breath. The vibration climbed through my wrist, pulled just beneath my collarbone, then lingered there, steady as a heartbeat. Whoever had held this piece before had carried their love into its weave. I turned it gently, looking for answers. No maker's mark. No careful record with provenance or story. Only the vaguest entry in the catalogue. Linked somehow to 1920s New Orleans, tucked away as common material, yet never discarded. Too ordinary to honor, too strange to forget. I pressed the cloth to my ear. The hum unraveled into layers. Needle hiss, crowd chatter, then brass rising bold above it all. The air felt close, dense, as if I'd stepped into the body of an old recording. Papers lifted against the draft, as if the room itself leaned toward the song. The weave caught the glow of my desk lamp, silver shifting faintly blue with each pulse. Against that glow I traced the edges between fingers. Patterns I didn't understand tugged me into focus. Then, 3 loose threads drew themselves into a tiny, deliberate triangle. I snagged my nail against it, and the air jumped alive. Frames rattled on their hooks. The scent of damp river air brushed against me, laced with pomade and brass polish. My glove slipped. Bare skin brushed fabric, and the room changed. Not burning, something more electric. A current roused from sleep. The cloth clung to my palm, while the walls lost their shape, the shelves sliding away like smoke on a tide. My knees struck the floor as the melody wound around my ribs, dragging, pulling, claiming. I had time for one glance at the glass before it swallowed me whole. My reflection stretched thin, mouth open with a name I didn't yet know. Then the museum broke apart. London fell away in streaks of gaslight and shadow. When the dissonance stilled, I stood gripping the cloth on uneven stone. Somewhere ahead, a trumpet held a long, unwavering note, steady as breath in the dark. The humid night settled heavy against my skin as I stood on uneven stone. Bourbon Street stretched wide ahead, glowing with lamplight and the scrape of gramophones. The air tasted faintly of brass and sugar, thick with voices that stacked on one another, until every corner pressed with sound. A clarinet laughed overhead, tumbling from a balcony where feet stamped time on iron rails. Steam drifted up through grates, blending with the murmur of dice rolls and shouts through half-open shutters. I held the cloth close as a man in spats leaned too near, his grin flashing gold in the dim. His eyes faltered at the shimmer pressed to my chest. I slipped out of reach, finding shelter beneath a jasmine arch, while a riverboat's whistle shook the lamps above. Lanterns swayed across painted signs, places whispered about in reports, and sidelined in footnotes. Here, prohibition was little more than a joke. Storyville had been shut years earlier, yet music and liquor spilled underground, finding new homes behind heavy doors. The sound I'd been following ran through it all, curling at the edges of the noise like thread through cloth. Each turn pulled me deeper. I ducked into a narrow passage where laundry lines sagged, bricks damp and glistening. The hum of the city softened. Chalk symbols marked the mortar. Stars, clefs bent into shapes that felt more spell than score. Something brushed my ankle. A torn newspaper dragged along the stones. I bent for it, words smudged but clear enough. Third disappearance this month. Above, a blurred photograph showed a man mid-performance, sax lifted, face struck through by the flash. The story beneath it spoke of vanishing musicians, of friends left clutching half-played chords. Witnesses described instruments keening on the floor, buzzing until the sound tired itself out. The rest was silence. 2 women passed by, perfume clinging sharp to the evening. One held her violin close. "They say the Velvet Note," she whispered. "Marcel played there Tuesday. His sister can't even remember him now." A glance behind her shoulder, then the warning, "Hush, walls have ears." And then they were gone, taking the scent and their fear with them. I folded the paper tight. Its edges crackled in my hand, the headline weight enough to still me where I stood. 3 disappearances this month, linked by music, by something pulled from the notes themselves. The question struck harder than the night's noise, and beneath it all the cloth thrummed steady, urging me on. Ahead, a door waited in the shadows, its paint peeling blue in the weak light. What had drawn me here was close. What had claimed those missing players might be closer still. The blue door swung closed with a click, sharp as a metronome. Inside, the air was blurred with smoke. Cigarettes over pipes, worn velvet thick with sweat. Candles guttered, their light bending in haze. I caught the other scents beneath. Gin too raw to pass for legal, rosin ground into bowstrings, something sharp in the air like metal after a storm. On the stage stood Jesse, barely older than a boy, yet the room stilled when he raised his trumpet. He didn't lift it like an ornament meant to charm, he held it the way someone holds a blade. The first note didn't just sound, it hung, a line of vapor drawn silver in the air. The ribbon curled toward the rafters, coiling wider, each tone a shimmer you could almost touch. At the front tables, women exhaled in wonder, their glasses frosting in their hands. A man at the bar lost grip of his dice, staring blank as though the sound had struck him blind. The cloth at my wrist throbbed with heat in time with his playing. Each beat pressed into me until I raised the fabric to my chest, trying to steady it. The air itself began to form pictures. A girl laughing against a river's edge. The glint of a chain passed hand to hand. the spill of tears on cloth too finely folded. The music drew life out of memory, and set it floating above us. Not a spectacle. Something closer. Something stolen. Then his high C faltered. The illusion broke like glass. Silver fragments spun down, one slashing across a woman's cheek. Her hand came away red, though she didn't wince. Jesse dropped, clutching his wrist, trumpet clattering to wood. Under his sleeve, black veins climbed up his arm. They marked him like notes inked along a stave. I reached him without planning to. His skin under my palm was thin, his frame too light, the fragility every conservator knows in fragile paper or parchment. But this was hunger, exhaustion, something older mixed with it. The veins pulsed in rhythm, with the cloth now burning hot against me. "They call it fever trade," Jesse said low through teeth, a name spoken with disdain, half slur, half warning. "The price of giving away too much." I unspooled the silver cloth. Without thought I pressed it to his wrist where the black lines writhed. The fabric drank them in. His breath shuddered as the marks withdrew, though not all. When I lifted the cloth, its edge glowed faintly with char. The club quieted. The pianist cleared his throat but kept his eyes down. At the door, 3 men in pressed grey suits leaned close, their hands folded, their stare unbreaking. One toyed with a silver coin, rolling it across his knuckles, waiting for Jesse to move. Jesse snatched his trumpet back, shoving it into its case with one hand. He smelled of peppermint, a small courtesy that softened the raw blood scent on his breath. It was ordinary, human, and it unsettled me more than the trick of silver vapor. "You shouldn't be here," he murmured. His grip closed over my wrist, then eased down to my palm. He didn't let go. Instead, he drew me close, voice against my temple. "Walk proud. Pretend you own the place, pretend you own me, otherwise we won't leave." I held his rhythm, chin raised, footsteps measured to match his. The cloth curled tight in my fist. Behind us, the grey-suited watchers let silence stretch, as if the song had not yet ended. When the night finally released us and the door clicked shut again, I knew this was no performance I could walk away from. It would not be the last time those eyes followed him. It would not be the last time I felt the cloth burn between us. Jesse's boarding house room smelled of camphor and old sheet music. Playbills covered the walls in overlapping layers, names struck through in charcoal. I touched one with my finger. The Velvet Note Orchestra. Every name crossed away except for the pianist's, circled dark and thick. "The circles mean they were taken first," Jesse said, pouring gin into mismatched glasses. His wrist still showed faint traces of those black veins. "The crossed ones lasted longer. They call it harvesting." The shutters rattled with a sudden gust. Beneath it, I caught a stranger sound. The faint metallic whine of a gramophone grinding backward. "They don't take bodies," he added, voice low. "They tune a song until it pulls the memory loose. Afterwards the person still breathes, but the part tied to the music is gone. A trombonist who can't read notes. A singer who forgets her mother's lullaby." He tugged back his cuff, a cleft-shaped scar marked deep into his skin. "They tried with me at 16. Someone interrupted before they finished. I spread the silver cloth on his rumpled bed. Along its darkened edges, soot-black shapes resolved into corners and streets. The pattern pressed against my thumb with the weight of cobblestone. I remembered the old museum atlas, and realized the shapes matched the quarters map. 7 buildings gleamed faintly through the pattern. One pulsed stronger than the rest. An abandoned theater shuttered since the war, still standing, though long surrendered to dust. When I touched the glow, the cloth hummed a G sharp, sharp and steady. I recognized the note, the same that had lingered in the rafters after Jesse's falter at the club. Jesse stiffened. "They're tuning forks. Every instrument left behind sings at that pitch. That's what they're gathering." I pressed my ear to the fabric's edge. Beyond the hum I heard it, clicks and layered ticking, like gears machining in the distance beneath the jazz. A clipping slid loose from Jesse's pillow. A woman stared from the grainy photo, stern jaw framed by a pearl collar. She raised her hands as if conducting. Jesse tapped her face with trembling fingers. "Madame de Marais, my first teacher. She told me once, if you cut corners, if you take what's not given, music can reshape reality itself." Walls coughed dust. Someone outside rapped 3 times and moved heavy-footed up the stairs. Jesse doused the lamp. Darkness closed in, leaving only the silver cloth glowing like trapped moonlight. I ran my hand over the pulsing lines, fixing them in my mind as Jesse packed his trumpet with shaking hands. From outside a key turned. The air grew charged, buzzing. "They're building something," Jesse whispered. His breath smelled of juniper and fear. "And the whole city is their tuning board." The attic smelled of varnish and smoke when Jesse unfolded the silver cloth across the bed. Moonlight clung to its frayed edges, where the fibers still bore scorch marks from his wrist. He pressed a single note against the piano's yellow keys, a low C that made the boards below us hum, as though something older stirred in their grain. I laid my palm on the cloth. The weave stirred restlessly, not the calm murmur I had felt in London, but a pulse that jumped and faltered. "It remembers your music," I said quietly. "Even the pauses between notes." Jesse lifted his trumpet and breathed down the length of its tubing without playing. At his breath, the threads straightened into taut, parallel lines, as though waiting for the downbeat. I felt it then. Their bond. The cloth would store what it was given, but the trumpet alone could call it back. 2 halves of a design, one to gather, one to release. We discovered the rules by accident and bruises. The first was simple. The cloth absorbed only what was bound to sound. Voices, footsteps, the scrape of bow on string. Second, it yielded its collection only when a musician played the right key, the music unlocking what lay hidden in its weave. And last, every touch demanded a price, feeding on Jesse's breath and blood, until his body shook as if hollowed. It was tempting to test the edges. Late one night, Jesse bent the cloth to recall a banjo's tune. The shimmer broke open into something more. A girl's voice, sweet and thin, calling her father home. The banjo player, who had been hollowed by absence, clutched Jesse's sleeve when the final note returned to him, eyes wet with relief. That success was enough to tell us the cloth had mercy, but only if guided with care. The risk was sharper when greed crept in. Jesse once tried to layer 2 memories at once, and the images tangled until both disintegrated in smoke. The veins rose on his throat again, black as ink across a score. I pulled the cloth free before it consumed more. Its threads loosened to ash at the edge, as if scorched by what they'd refused. By dawn the pattern revealed another secret. Draped over his trumpet case, the The cloth bled its contents not as ghosts this time, but as notation etched faintly across the leather, a score waiting to be played. The cloth was not only a vessel, it was a cipher, turning lived moments into music and music into memory again. A step sounded above, measured and too steady to be chance. Jesse caught my wrist in warning, thumb pressed against bone. The silver threads quivered, their glow answering calls we could not yet see. And somewhere not far away, others had already heard the same hum. It was clear then. We were not the only ones learning the patterns. Soon we would need allies, and quickly. The back room of Lulu White's mahogany hall held a smell of powder and gun oil. I could feel the history in those walls. Storyville long closed, yet this place still pulsed with what women had built when other doors shut them out. Around the scarred oak table sat 7 of them, their posture taut but steady. I watched the pianist's fingers, stained with ink and worry. A violinist tapped her bow against the wood, teeth marks carved into it from some earlier fight. A club owner spun a straight razor across her knuckles, each flick punctuating what the others said. "You can't steal what we won't surrender," said the clarinetist, her cigarette crushed out on a bar of music. The ash left a scorch across the staff. Another ward against listening ears. Under the table, a bass drum stretched like a heartbeat, struck once, then again. Coded pulses passing between safe rooms hidden across the quarter. I kept my eyes moving over small gestures. One woman traced a tattooed staff line along her throat, freckles falling into place like notes of a melody. Another poured gin with practiced care, the glass rim clinking soft as punctuation. They didn't raise their voices. They leaned in closer instead, layering their answers like chords. The resistance worked by reinvention. When the cabal seized clubs, these women opened basements and back rooms. When trumpets were confiscated, they coached children to blow into radiator pipes and bottles, until real scales emerged. The sabotage never shouted. It whispered. A spoon dropped into a drink to upset an acoustic chain. A cigarette case rattling with slivers of piano wire, tucked into a dancer's palm. A gramophone fed backward reels of Swan Lake, its noise thick enough to warp lamplight. I realized then that Madame de Marais had miscalculated. Fear was expected. What she found instead was precision. Every small defiance stopped one harvest. Every ruined ritual left one soul kept whole. Their scars were proof. A broken finger curled permanently from one fight over an instrument. A jagged cut where an earring had been torn free mid-raid. They didn't flaunt the wounds. They passed them like memory. An unspoken score everyone knew by heart. When I spread the silver cloth across the table, they leaned so close I could see each lamp reflected in their pupils. It shimmered with Jesse's intercepted memories. Agents whispering in the shuttered theater, stolen instruments testing new alignments. No speeches followed, only tapped fingernails, lifted brows. Agreement carried in silence. Before they dispersed, the club owner pressed a cold key into my hand. "Speakeasy under the butcher's shop," she murmured. "Its piano is out of tune. That's the point." Her breath carried peppermint and smoke. Then she touched the hollow at her breastbone. "They took my wife's voice. But here," she said, tapping once, "she still hums." The women hushed together then. A single note hummed low in their throats, simple and steady. It quivered the cloth's edges before fading into quiet. When I stepped into the alley, their echoes stayed with me like a torch carried under the ribs. Later, as I listened to rain gather on iron roofs, that hum returned. It carried me forward, toward the fragile music waiting in the shadows. 8. The romance unfolds. The practice room was dim, rain soft against the roof. Jesse leaned over his trumpet case while I stitched its torn lining, the silver cloth still leaving traces of scorch. He set a phonograph needle in place, and the hiss of a nocturne filled the room. Chopin's melody was familiar, until halfway through, the right hand strayed into places notes shouldn't be. Diminished chords scraped along the edges of my teeth. Wrong but compelling. He lifted the needle before the end. "That's what it feels like inside me," he said. His hand flexed, the veins surfacing then sinking. Always a little out of tune. We'd been working late nights like this, testing the cloth, patching damage, carrying secrets back from resistance meetings. Some evenings left us speechless, sharing only glances after a narrow escape. In those silences something heavier than danger settled, though neither of us named it yet. I reached for his wrist, the place where dark lines clustered deepest. My thumb traced circles, softer than words. "The cloth takes the strain," I whispered, "but it doesn't touch the source." His breath shivered through his nose, as though muted through brass. Every song costs something. Not the big things, small ones. The taste of my mama's stew, the shade of my first case. They disappear, grain by grain. He opened his palm. A scar caught the light, silver as wire. She called it the artist's tax. The phonograph stuttered into a woman's voice, lilting in French about lost keys. Neither of us moved. Rain shifted rhythm on the tin above. We had begun crafting rituals of our own. After a memory was restored to its owner, Jesse would press the cloth to my temple, letting a trace settle in me. There were times afterward our foreheads almost touched, the air thick, but steady. Tonight, he held back. His trumpet lingered in his lap. What if I erase myself by giving too much? The words suspended between us, longer than the silence that followed a raid. I picked up his mouthpiece, pressing it cool against my lips, not to sound it but to share its weight. "Then I'll be your memory," I answered. Not a promise, but a choice. He leaned close, not for a kiss, but to rest his forehead against my shoulder. Our hands found each other at the case's edge. The record spun through its revolutions, the storm pacing time. In another life, it might have been coffee and radio. Here it was stolen notes and scars. Still, we kept choosing. Jesse pulled back at last. He raised the trumpet, no magic this time. Just one clean human note. Rain kept time, steady and sure. I opened the cloth. Its threads shimmered with everything we had gathered, rescued moments, and the quiet ones between. I traced a mark still warm from his pulse. "It remembers," I said. His fingers closed over mine. Outside, the storm deepened. It felt like the city itself was holding its breath. Something waited, and we would have to meet it soon. The abandoned theater smelled of plaster and damp dust, a sweetness like burnt sugar clinging faintly to the balconies. Desmarais had chosen it for the sound. Even a whisper turned clear beneath the domed ceiling. every word pressed forward as if amplified. 19 grey-suited figures stood around the orchestra pit. Their polished brass instruments pulsed faint light, each one stolen from the vanished. The resistance women slipped into place, one up in the rigging with a violin bow tucked between her teeth, another gliding across the floor to poison the bottle by the podium. Their movements were precise. The cabal wanted them seen. At the center, Madame de Marais raised a conductor's baton, carved from something ivory pale. Rumor said bone. She tapped it on the lead violin's strings. The note lifted and refused to die, stretching longer than breath. Around her, the other instruments joined. Sound warped into dissonance. Above the pit, shadows flickered. Faces and hands of lost musicians, pulled into an endless rehearsal they could never finish. I opened the silver cloth across my arms. Its threads were frayed, dulled, almost brittle. Beside me, Jesse lifted his trumpet. No air came. Only a line of blood drawn from his lip. Her gaze found us. "You brought my tuning fork," she said. Her voice layered and doubled, as though every silenced singer spoke through her. The circle closed in. Jesse tried again, not with the horn, but his bare voice. Shaky. Young. A hymn stripped of training. The cloth quivered in my hands, fraying at the edges, as I pressed it to the veins darkening his arm. Then the memories came. A boy practicing scales on a porch step. The smell of gumbo broth cooling in the kitchen. A clumsy first dance toes stepped upon in laughter. Each flowed into the tainted instruments, breaking their false harmony. The violin shrieked. A tuba belched smoke. Desmarais' baton faltered. Shadows wavered. The women moved. Glass shattered from the chandelier above. The pianist hammered the wrong keys on purpose, spilling sound sharp enough to splinter focus. I rushed to the pit, the cloth blistering my skin as it drank in the cabal's residue. Jesse raised his trumpet at last. He didn't summon fury, he played the same melody I'd first heard in the museum, a lullaby. Warm, steady, human. Desmarais clawed the air as her chorus of stolen voices unraveled, torn away like fabric soaking in water. Her instruments rusted mid-note, but Jesse's hand dimmed even as he played. Each memory freed took with it one of his own. His mother's stew, the color blue of his first case, the laughter from earlier that week. I reached him, as his left hand faded completely. He still held the trumpet with the last of his strength. I lowered my forehead to his, voice breaking but steady. "Let me help you remember. Both of us." The final note trembled, soft and clear. Then the cloth fell, its magic spent. The baton snapped in two, Desmarais gone like smoke undone. The theater sighed as its cursed acoustics at last gave way. Between the settling dust and broken rafters, he was still there. Dimmed, scarred, but breathing. My hand remained clasped in his, and I chose to hold fast. Around us, silence thickened into the kind that waits for the morning. 10. The bittersweet victory. Dawn stretched over New Orleans in bruised purple and gold, the air faint with fried dough and fresh paint. The city stirred back to itself. musicians blinking awake in alleys with instruments clutched tight, club owners scrubbing chalk symbols from their doors, and a child humming a tune she had never been taught. Jesse leaned against a lamppost outside the ruined theatre, his shoulders drawn but upright. The black veins that had marked him were gone, yet the price lingered. He could still play, still bend notes when he wished, but each song now stripped something private away. A taste carried since childhood, a face from his own past, the smell of one ordinary day. I pressed the silver cloth into his hands. Its edges were singed, too fragile to recover. It no longer hummed, it only sighed. We wandered slowly through the streets, loosening their tension. At Café du Monde we shared warm beignets, sugar dusting our fingers and sleeves. The music that rose from the quarter sounded lighter, as though the city had remembered how to breathe. Jesse paused often, beside the riverboat where he had first played, at the shop window where brass horns gleamed in display. His reflection bent across the curve of a polished trombone. "I wrote a song for you," he said at last, "never played it." He didn't explain further, and I didn't ask. Some melodies are meant to remain inside the heart. As dusk came, we climbed to the rooftop of a boarding house. The resistance had left us a parting gift there, a gramophone, and 2 thin glasses filled with stolen champagne. The city spread wide below, music reclaimed, voices rising where silence had lingered. From that height, the place where the portal would open at moonrise shivered faintly in the alley's air. Jesse's hands were steady again as he poured. No sorcery remained in him, none of its toll, only the weight of being himself. His cuffs were frayed, his suit hung too big, yet when he smiled, I felt the room hush. "You'll keep the cloth," he said. I folded it into my pocket, lighter now, nearly empty. "It feels finished." "Not to me." His fingertip brushed my temple, then lingered above my chest. "Some of it is still here." From the gramophone came the resistance women's laughter, their voices slipping through a fragment of tiger rag. The trumpet skipped, as though leaving room for him. His grin was unshadowed. Full moonlight struck sharp across the alley as the portal shimmered open, revealing cobbles glistening beneath London rain. Jesse pressed a single trumpet valve into my palm. "For when you set it on record," he whispered. His thumb tapped once like a quiet downbeat. "Tell them I was magnificent." Later, when the portal's light folded me back into the museum, the cloth in my pocket stirred faintly. It carried not the breath of a city, but the echo of one last note, waiting to be heard in silence. The silver cloth lay flat on my desk in the British Museum, its frayed edges catching the glow of the lamp. It no longer hummed, not in the way it once had, but in the deep hush of after hours, when the guard's footsteps drifted away down the corridor. Its threads seemed to shiver faintly against the oak. I brushed it with bare fingertips. The weave felt ordinary, linen and lint, yet beneath that quiet, a prickle stirred. My notebook was open beside it. 17 pages in, the lines had long since grown less clinical. Numbers gave way to sketches half-formed, notes about the sheen of water at dusk, the way a lantern's glow trails its own reflection. No measurement would capture what clung between those fibers. The central heating sighed awake, a pipe knocked in the walls. I smoothed the cloth beneath both palms and found my thumb caught on a raised patch near the middle. Tilted in the lamplight, It revealed the outline of a trumpet's valve. Small, precise, unmistakable. Its presence was quiet, but impossibly deliberate. A tower of files slumped at my side. Contracts, sheet music, records with missing names. The gaps told me more than the lines. A neat ledger could not explain what lingered. And yet here it was, cross-stitched through a rag of silver. Then the cloth stirred. I stilled my hand. One thread curled and loosened. Only that. As subtle as a held breath. I did not move. My pen rolled across the desk, and I let it fall. When I finally reached into the drawer, I withdrew the trumpet valve Jesse had placed in my palm. London's damp had dulled its shine, but the shape held. I set it on the cloth. At first, nothing. Then, with a careful turn, 3/4, as if unfastening, it sparked to life. A flicker ran up my arm. The lamp stuttered. For 3 heartbeats the office was filled with scents that did not belong. Chicory, turpentine, night air thick with heat. When the light steadied, the cloth was still once more. Yet behind my closed eyes lingered the image of a man's shadow leaning against a lamppost, fingers tapping rhythm on his thigh. I folded the cloth slowly, wrapping the valve inside, and slid both into a secured conservation cabinet. From there, I filled a short entry in the records. Condition note: residual vibrational anomaly. Recommend ongoing observation. The cloth twitched again as I set down my pen. Just a breath. Barely enough to notice. I let it pass. Rain softened across the roof above. I leaned back in my chair, exhaled once, and allowed the quiet to hold me steady. The truest magic rests in what we don't hear. The quiet note between breaths, the melody left half-sung. This journey through New Orleans lingers not in spectacle, but in echoes stitched into cloth, and in the memory of a song that still waits to be found. Let it settle in you like a slow refrain, warm enough to hold through the night. Listen for the pauses, that's where the wonder hides. If this warmed you tonight, settle in, and subscribe for another quiet journey. Let this be your last thought before sleep.